Her eyes were missing, her tongue was missing, parts of her lip was missing, and a portion of her skull had fractured and a piece of her skull had been removed. Hey, what's going on, guys? MrBallen here from TikTok. I'm your resident scary storyteller. Today, I have a really cool story. It's actually one of the first kind of unsolved mysteries that really captured my attention and drew me into researching all of these kind of crazy unsolved mysteries that are out there. The too long didn't read version of this is you have 9 highly experienced hikers that go off into the mountains and die under extremely mysterious conditions. There are photos and journal entries. I mean, there's just a preponderance of evidence, but no one can make any sense of it. And to this day, it is one of the single most interesting things that I've ever found on the internet. So, in 1959, 10 hikers decided to head out on this 190-mile journey through the Ural Mountains in the northern part of the Soviet Union. Now, this was not a vacation. This was more like a mission to this group of experienced hikers, because in completing this 190-mile journey, they would receive their level 3 hiker certification, which at the time was the highest in the country. So they would be the top dogs in hiking. So on January 25th, they set off on this 16-day, 190-mile journey. The group was in good spirits. The pictures of them, they were happy. They were on course. Everything was going right. And then they reached this kind of critical juncture in the trip. They reached this mountain pass that actually was subsequently renamed the Dyatlov Pass after the leader of the group. The leader was named Igor Dyatlov. And so they reach this mountain pass and they know they need to go through it. They need to negotiate this mountain pass. And so they set up camp, and the plan is early the next day, they're gonna attempt to push through this mountain pass. And hopefully over the space of one day, they would be able to get through that mountain pass and set up camp on the other side. So early the next morning, they get up and they begin their ascent through this mountain pass. But unfortunately, a very bad weather system rolled in and it pushed them off course. And in fact, it pushed them onto a different slope that the local Mansi tribe called Dead Mountain. And so they get pushed off course. They're not going to get through the mountain pass. And then one of the first strange things happens. For some reason, now this group of experienced hikers that should have known that their best bet at this point, because of the bad weather and being pushed off course, would be to retreat off the mountain and find somewhere that was more protected to spend the night. Because at this point, they got to set up camp somewhere. But for some reason, they decide to stay on the exposed slope of Dead Mountain, which means that they would be setting up camp in not only just a wickedly windy area, and there's like risk of avalanche and any number of things could happen, but they'd also be exposed to negative 40-degree temperatures. They're like out in the open, just getting crushed by the elements. But for whatever reason, they make camp right on the slopes of Dead Mountain. So when the hikers don't show up to a rendezvous point that they were supposed to meet at a predetermined time, the folks they were set to meet, who obviously didn't meet up with the hikers, they let authorities know. It was noted that they had not made rendezvous, but because this was an experienced group, this was not a now let's send out the search party. It was more like, okay, they should have been here, but it's 9 people, they know what they're doing, they'll get here soon. 3 weeks go by, and still no one's heard from these 9 hikers. And at this point, a search party is sent out, even including military units are sent out to find them. And relatively quickly, the search party comes across the campsite on Dead Mountain, and what they find is just horrifying. So the first thing they notice is that the tent they had been staying in had been slashed open, except from the inside, meaning someone inside the tent had slashed it open. And then in the tent itself, neatly stacked, was all their cold weather gear, or the majority of their cold weather gear, like their shoes and their jackets. I mean, it's all there. And there's no sign of the hikers. And then near the camp, like literally right out of this tent, is this neat set of footprints leading down towards this forest. And investigators, when they looked at the footprints, they could determine a couple of things. One, the majority of the hikers had either been barefoot or only wearing one shoe. In addition, their cadence, they were looking at the space of their footsteps, their gait, I should say, was indicative of a group of people that was walking calmly. This was not a panicked run away from your campsite. This was a walking calmly away from your campsite with not the right clothing on, probably no shoes on, down to the forest in an exposed mountain slope with negative 40-degree temperatures. So investigators, they start following these footsteps down towards this forest, and it leads them to this area right at the outside of this forest, right underneath this big cedar tree, where there's evidence of a campfire. And around that campfire are two of the hikers' bodies. And they're just wearing underwear, they're barefoot, and their hands had been like scraped. The palms of their hands had been badly scraped. And the tree that was right next to them had evidence of someone had been trying to climb it. A lot of the branches had been ripped down, as if someone had desperately tried to climb up this tree, but was unsuccessful. As if they were trying to, seek shelter from something or someone on the ground, but obviously they did not make it in time. Within several hundred feet of that campfire, the investigators found three other hikers' bodies. They were similarly underdressed, and it appeared, the way their bodies had frozen, that they were actually trying to make their way back up to the campsite. Investigators noted that one of those three hikers had a head injury that was consistent with someone repeatedly smashing their head. Another of those three had a strange rectangular bruise on their side. And then, oddly enough, while they were underdressed, each of those three were wearing the other's bits of clothing. It was like they all collectively put on the wrong clothes and not enough clothes. Despite the strangeness of the five bodies that were found and what they were wearing, or I guess what they weren't wearing, it was determined that they all died of hypothermia and that there was no foul play. It wasn't until May, when the weather warmed up a little bit and some of the snow had melted, that investigators were able to locate the remaining four hikers' bodies. And, it was really the condition that they were found in, the second group of hikers, that really took this mystery and elevated it and made it this kind of urban legend, because it makes no sense how they were found. So the remaining four were found in this creek bed that came to be known as the Dyatlov Den. They were buried under about 13 feet of snow. And so of the four bodies that were found in the Dyatlov Den, one of them had simply died of hypothermia and kind of was a lot like the first group, right? There's no severe injuries, really, just they died of hypothermia. But the other three, that was not the case at all. The seventh hiker had a skull fracture that occurred right before he died. The eighth hiker had these extreme chest fractures that it was almost like he'd been hit by a car. The ninth hiker really was the most unfortunate. Not only did she also have her chest kind of caved in, but her eyes were missing, her tongue was missing, parts of her lip was missing, and a portion of her skull had fractured and a piece of her skull had been removed. Even more bizarre is, in this second group, they had all taken pieces of clothing from the other, indicating that they had all died at different times. It was like one would die and then the other hikers would take their clothes and put them on. And then someone else would die and they would take their clothes and put them on. And I guess even stranger than that is the clothes themselves had traces of radiation on them. The Soviet government was quick to close the case. They cited, either a natural disaster or, perhaps the hikers' incompetence as the result or the reason behind this horrible tragedy. But nobody really believed, nobody as in the family, the friends, really the Soviet population, they didn't believe that could be the actual explanation. Early on, after this case has been closed, the Soviet people, they started to believe a couple theories. One of them was there was this local Mansi tribe that was in the area that perhaps ambushed the hikers and killed them. That would kind of explain the the reason for the hikers suddenly abandoning their tent and not being dressed, and also the injuries of the second group, that could be explained by, you know, an attack by this Mansi tribe. But there was a couple issues with that theory. One, the Mansi tribe is known as this incredibly peaceful tribe, that it's just very uncharacteristic for them. There was also no other footprints leading into the area. It was just the footprints of the hikers that were, you know, in the area. Another popular theory is a swift and violent avalanche that, you know, the group couldn't have seen coming. You know, they hear it at the last minute, they jump out of their tent, you know, cut it open, they go running. But the problem with that is the tree line down near the forest they walked to, there's no sign that the trees have been damaged in any way, that, you know, there weren't any debris from an avalanche like there would be. And in that area, you know, there were locals like the Mansi tribe, and they didn't report an avalanche, they didn't hear an avalanche. And in fact, historically, there had never been a reported avalanche in that area. And subsequently, you know, for decades afterward, there still has never been an avalanche there. Another popular theory is that the reason they left their tent in the first place is because when you get hypothermia, you know, it can cause you to actually believe, kind of paradoxically, that you're actually too hot and you start stripping your clothes before you ultimately succumb to hypothermia. But again, that doesn't really cover down on the injuries of the second group. And then, of course, I mean, with any sort of unsolved mystery at this magnitude, there's theories that range from, you know, government cover-up to like a Yeti attack or an alien abduction. This case was closed, and the Soviet government kind of just gave a fairly ambiguous answer as to why. Authorities actually officially said that the cause of death for these hikers was a compelling natural force that they were not able to overcome, which that in and of itself is an eerie way of putting it, right? They were unable to overcome a natural force. And it's not saying this was a natural disaster necessarily. They're just saying it was a natural force, which is just a very interesting way to put it. But either way, the case was closed, and that was that. But in 2019, Russia actually officially reopened this case. And they decided they were going to get to the bottom of it, because this was a case that, I mean, it is quite high profile in the world of kind of unsolved mysteries. I mean, I think if you Google, like, you know, top 10 unsolved mysteries, the Dyatlov Pass is going to come up in that top 10. This is just one of the more well-known cases. And so Russia officially reopens it in 2019, but they were only willing to look at 3 theories, which was, you know, an ice slab or a snow slab breaking and coming down and hitting them, an avalanche, or a hurricane. But unfortunately, despite diving into this and doing their diligence, they really didn't come to any sort of conclusive conclusion. They kind of ended it, they closed it, I should say, much the same way they did back when it actually happened in the late 50s, which is, yep, some natural force did this. They did, that was it. It was really unsatisfying. The only real conclusion that they made in 2019 was that no criminal activity was indicated. So whatever happened, they're saying was natural. It was not, it was not criminal. So with that, the mystery today remains technically closed, but unofficially, I would say this mystery is not even close to solved. And I'd love to hear in the comments what you think happened at Dyatlov Pass. So that's going to do it, guys. I encourage you to go check this out, Dyatlov Pass. It's fascinating. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. And also, please turn on notifications so you don't miss any of these stories. I'm going to be putting these out weekly. It'll range from mysteries to scary stuff to disturbing, creepy stuff, kind of just generally interesting, darker content is going to be the focus of this channel. Also, be sure to check me out on TikTok. My handle is MrBallen, same as my YouTube channel. I'm also on Instagram, but my handle is JohnBallen416. That's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week. How did she manage to bypass the alarm, climb onto the water tank without the use of a ladder, open the lid, and then wriggle inside of the tank itself, and then shut the lid, and then, drown? How did that happen? Hey, what's going on, guys? MrBallen here. You probably know me from TikTok. Hopefully you're starting to get to know me on YouTube as well. Today we have a really fascinating mystery And no, I'm not going to be saying that about every single mystery I do. I think I said that about the last one, the Dyatlov case one. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. But this one really is. It's probably in the top 5 of the most fascinating unsolved mysteries on the internet. And I think the reason is because there's this video footage. But there's really a remarkable story around that footage, and that's the story I want to tell. And that is the case of Elisa Lam. The too long didn't read version. Elisa is this young, smart, beautiful college student. She makes it to Los Angeles, and then she disappears. She was found dead in this water tank on the roof of this sketchy hotel, and there's video footage of her right before she winds up in the water tank, which is just totally bizarre. Elisa Lam was the daughter of Chinese immigrants. She was born in 1991 in Canada. She was an avid blogger. She was very into fashion. She also was dealing with some mental health issues. She had been diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. She had also been diagnosed as having depression. Even though her family initially was very close hold about detailing anything about her mental health struggles, they had never seen any suicide attempts or any suicidal ideations. On January 13th, 2013, Elisa Lam posted that she had just purchased her tickets to travel to San Diego, then on to Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, and then on to San Francisco. She was calling this her West Coast tour. So she heads off on this tour. She goes to San Diego, and then she takes an Amtrak train up to Los Angeles. And so she arrives in Los Angeles on January 26th, and she checks into this notoriously sketchy hotel called the Cecil Hotel, which is actually located right near Skid Row in LA. So it's a large homeless population, very high crime rate. And in fact, the Cecil Hotel itself, in addition to being located in a pretty seedy area, it had a fairly macabre history itself. It was actually famously associated with the Black Dahlia murder, where the victim had actually been at the bar inside the Cecil Hotel before she vanished. And then, including the Black Dahlia, there were 15 other non-natural deaths associated with the Cecil Hotel ever since it was built in the 1920s. And you would think that it would have been condemned, but in fact, LA has made it a landmark right now, so it's kind of protected, the hotel itself. But either way, she checks into the Cecil Hotel on January 26th, and initially she's put into a shared hostel-style room with some other tourists in the area. But it would come out in the investigation that she actually had to be moved out of that room due to the complaints of her roommates that, said she was acting very odd. And so they moved her to a private room. Now, Elisa was traveling alone. And if you combine that with the fact that, she was dealing with some mental health issues, her parents were very nervous about this trip. And so they had made this deal that in order for her to do this West Coast swing on her own, that she would need to check in with them every single night. And so she was doing that. So she takes off through San Diego, she checks into Cecil Hotel, she's checking in with them every night. But on January 31st, which was the day she was supposed to check out of the Cecil Hotel, she went silent. And her parents, who were all over this, immediately were very concerned, and they called the Los Angeles Police Department. The police acted very quickly on this case. They descended on the Cecil Hotel. They started looking everywhere. They interviewed hotel staff. They interviewed local businesses. They plastered her picture everywhere, and they couldn't find her. The hotel staff, they said that, we saw Elisa, and they did mention that she had been moved from the shared room to her own room, but that any interaction she had had with staff, there weren't that many, was she was minding her own business. She was by herself, and she seemed like a totally normal guest of the hotel. There was a business owner. She owned a bookstore called The Last Bookstore, kind of ironic, who saw Elisa Lam. She was one of the last people to see Elisa, and she said that she was there purchasing gifts clearly for her family, little trinkets to kind of memorialize her trip through LA. But that was it. And so despite the massive attempts to find her, and this case had also gained quite a bit of media attention, not just in LA, but internationally. This was all the way back in China where her family was from. This was making headlines everywhere. Despite all of that, no one could find Elisa. Then the police were given footage of Elisa in the elevator, and the police released that footage to the public, and it pretty much immediately went viral. No one can make sense of what the heck Elisa is doing in the elevator. She gets into the elevator, she proceeds to press all of the buttons, and then hides in the corner of the elevator. And then she starts poking her head in and out into the hallway as if she's looking for someone. And then eventually she kind of gets into the threshold of the elevator and starts moving her hands around kind of crazily, like she's either talking to someone or, I mean, it really looks like she's hallucinating or something. It's very bizarre hand gestures. And then she disappears. And that was the last footage we have of her alive. And what's even stranger is probably right after this video is taken, she goes to the rooftop by her own will, or someone made her go there, and she dies. So we're looking at the last few moments of Elisa's life. Now, the footage, despite its virality and despite how much more attention this gave the case, it didn't actually provide any big breaks, because the footage just captures this woman who seems kind of disturbed on the elevator. It doesn't give away really anything that actually happened to her. But after the release of that video, over the course of the next 2 weeks, guests of the Cecil Hotel started complaining about low water pressure, as well as a foul taste in the water. In fact, one of the guests even said that the water, when she turned it on, had come out black before clearing, and then it was clear water, but then the water had a foul taste to it. On February 19th, so this is now 2 weeks after her disappearance, and now following all of these complaints about the water, Santiago Lopez, who's a maintenance worker for the Cecil Hotel, he goes up to the roof and he goes to check on the water. He opens up the water tank to see what's going on, and there, lying in the water, is the body of Elisa Lam. So a couple things about the water tank itself. So it's on the roof of the hotel, and in order to get onto the roof, you would have to go through a door that has an alarm set. So you'd have to know the alarm code. Because if you didn't and you triggered the alarm, I mean, it goes off across the whole hotel. I mean, someone would have heard this alarm. Or you could have, I guess, taken the fire escape, but that's a fairly obvious thing, and someone would have noticed, and no one claimed to have seen her taking, the fire escape up to the roof. Then let's assume you've made it on the roof somehow, either by knowing the code to the door or using the fire escape. The tank, which is this 4-foot tall tank, is actually about 10 feet off the ground. And in order to get to the tank itself, you would need to use a ladder. And there weren't any ladders present. There's no ladders anywhere, right? But so even if you manage to climb onto the tank, without the use of a ladder, there are these heavy lids on the surface of these tanks. I mean, the hotel doesn't want people getting into the drinking water, so it's pretty well guarded. If you could get the tank to, I think it actually slides off, the opening to the tank isn't particularly large, so you'd have to wriggle your way into the tank. And then once you're in, it would be nearly impossible to shut the tank again. And the tank was shut when they found it. When Santiago Lopez went up there, the latch to the lid was undone, but the lid was covering the tank. So how did she manage to bypass the alarm, climb onto the water tank without the use of a ladder, open the lid, and then wriggle inside of the tank itself, and then shut the lid, and then, drown? How did that happen? Because her body had decomposed significantly, it was fairly difficult to run any sort of forensic testing to see what the heck happened to her. But the coroner was able to determine that this was an accidental drowning. As improbable as that sounds, that's what the coroner's report indicated. Amateur and professional sleuths alike are fairly divided on what actually happened to Elisa. Some say that if you look at the odd behavior complaints that have been made against Elisa by her roommates that first night at the Cecil Hotel when they had to move her to her own room, people point to that as, indicative of someone who had had a sort of psychotic break. And that, the footage of her in the elevator was just someone having a manic episode. And that's what caused all of this. And there's a fairly large contingent of people who believe that. Others say Elisa just committed suicide, that even though it was a complicated suicide, it was suicide nonetheless. And of course, because this is a very high-profile, unsolved case, there are theories about this being, somehow connected to the paranormal or ghosts or any number of theories. But the bottom line is, despite knowing the who, what, where, and when, and having footage and timelines, we just don't know the why. The one thing that most people investigating this case can agree on is they really want the coroner's report to be re-examined. Not because there was negligence or something, but because there has to be something else there. This can't have just been another accidental drowning when just the circumstances surrounding her death are so bizarre. And just the likelihood of her being able to get onto the roof and up into that water tank without help is a little bit far-fetched. And so, unfortunately that hasn't happened. And, for her parents, unfortunately, there's probably not going to be closure anytime soon. So that's going to do it, guys. If you haven't already, please smash like and subscribe to my channel. I'd love it if you turned on notifications as well. I'm really making a push to get more of these stories on my YouTube channel. Looking to do 1 or 2 even every week. This is really my primary focus going forward. So please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Also, be sure to follow me on TikTok. My handle's the same as YouTube. It's MrBallen. And then also on Instagram, it's JohnBallen416. Thank you all so much, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Cases like this don't happen. Hey, what's going on, guys? MrBallen here. You probably know me from TikTok. In fact, I bet there's a percentage of people that are on this YouTube video just because they watched my TikTok version of this case, the Jamie Close case. And so thank you for making the jump and watching the full version. I hope you'll stick around and you'll actually subscribe to my channel, because I'm trying to make YouTube my primary medium for sharing stories with the world. It'll be much the same content that I'm putting on TikTok, scary stories, murder mysteries, unsolved stuff, spooky stuff, dark stuff, just kind of anything that's compelling. And YouTube's going to be the place where I try to do that primarily. And so I'm already committing to doing, 1 video on YouTube a week. I'm trying to make it 2. This is the first week I've done 2, so we'll see how it plays out. I do have, 3 kids and other job responsibilities, so it's a little hard to juggle, but I love doing this stuff. So please, if you enjoy this video and you like my content, please subscribe, please stick around. So with today's case, the Jamie Close case, the reason I ended up choosing this one and making a TikTok version of it, now a YouTube version of it, is actually pretty straightforward. It's because even though it's true, if you were to make a movie out of this case, the viewers wouldn't really believe it, because the perpetrator in this case has no motive and has no history of committing any crimes. I think he had a parking ticket. And he targets a child. Which, putting that all together, you don't see that. That is not a popular archetype for a movie. The idea that there are just these random, perpetrators out there just targeting random children and harming them and their families. There has to be a motive, especially when it comes to children being involved. There has to be a motive. And in this case, there really wasn't. And even the perpetrator, when he was in prison, he wrote a letter to Jamie and her surviving family members where he kind of tried to explain why he did it, but even he didn't have strong enough language to communicate what it was. He made it seem like it was pretty complicated, and even he didn't know. He just said, hey, look, I'm not a serial killer. I just had to do this, and I don't really know why. So it's just one of the more disturbing cases when you go into it knowing that this whole thing was perpetrated by someone who had no criminal history. He had no connection to the victims, except that he randomly had a chance encounter with one of them. And it just kind of happened. It's just one of those horrible things that even now, no one really understands, including the killer himself. So let's dive into it. In 2018, 21-year-old Jake Patterson is on his way to work at a cheese factory in Wisconsin. He'd only been working there for a couple of days. This is like his 3rd day on the job. He's this kind of typical guy leading a typical life in Wisconsin. And he's driving his Ford Taurus. He comes to a stop behind a school bus where middle school kids are getting on the bus. And he's sitting there and he looks up and he sees, for the first time in his life, a blonde-haired, green-eyed girl who ended up being 13-year-old Jamie Close. And as he's sitting there, because this all came out in a very lengthy confession, so we have lots of details about this case. As he's sitting there watching Jamie, who again, he doesn't know, get on the bus, he has this realization that she is going to be the girl that he takes. He actually says that sitting behind the wheel, he's like, I realized right then and there that she's the one I'm gonna take. And so a guy with no criminal history, he's sitting there coming up with this plan of how he's gonna abduct this girl. And it would come out later in his confession, which again was very lengthy, that he put a ton of effort into planning out this abduction. So let's talk about Jake's plan. He takes his father's Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun, which is a very commonly purchased weapon. He assumed that because it is, so widely purchased, it would be hard to track. Okay, so he takes his gun, takes a couple slugs, so he's got his weapon. Then he goes and purchases a balaclava, so a mask, a whole head mask from Walmart. He shaves his head, shaves his beard so that there wouldn't be any hairs, for forensic evidence at the crime scene. This is all so premeditated. He went out and purchased gloves and wiped his gloves all so they wouldn't have prints on them. He purchased steel-toed boots and dark jeans and a dark jacket. In the car he was going to use, because he plans on abducting Jamie, and he knew he was going to be keeping her in the trunk. He cut the cord inside of his vehicle. It was when you press this button inside the car, it would open the trunk. Basically, he didn't want any access to the trunk unless you had the key. So he cuts that cord. He disconnected the dome light inside of his Taurus, his Ford Taurus, to try to better conceal him when he's in the car. I mean, this guy, he's really thinking hard about how he's going to do this. He knew he was going to go in that house, he's going to take Jamie, and he had his big plan, right? 2 separate times, Jake tried, unsuccessfully, to abduct Jamie. He drove to their house the first time, and there were cars in the driveway, so he got spooked and he leaves. He comes back and he's about to drive up the driveway when lights come on, so he leaves again. But on October 15th, 2018, unfortunately, he was successful. It was around midnight when Jake Patterson rolls into the close family's driveway. The lights in his car are off, the headlights are off, and he rolls into the driveway. And inside of this very modest home, Jamie was sleeping with her dog, Molly. And Molly hears the car pull into the driveway and starts barking. Wakes up Jamie. Jamie looks out, she sees a car she doesn't recognize, it's the middle of the night. And she runs to her parents' room and she alerts her parents. Jamie's father, James, he goes to the front door with a flashlight. Meanwhile, Denise, that's Jamie's mother, and Jamie retreat into the bathroom where they shut the door. They sense that this was potentially going to be a home invasion, and certainly they were right. So they actually barricade the door with a dresser that was in there. And they get in the tub and they shut the curtains. And so James is at the front door and he watches Jake Patterson get out of his car, calmly walk up the steps to the front door. And at this time, James is thinking that perhaps this is the police. And so when Jake arrives at the door and starts banging on the door, James shines his light out through the window, kind of gets a peek at him, then moves over to the door itself where there's this little tiny window on the door, and he looks through, shining the light, and he says, "Show me your badge." And unfortunately, it was at the same time that Jake raises his shotgun and pulls the trigger, shoots right through the glass, hits James, and James dies immediately. Back in the bathroom, Jamie would later say that when she heard that shotgun blast, that she knew that her father was dead. And I think Denise, her mother, knew that as well, because immediately Denise picks up her phone and calls 911 as she's talking to the dispatcher, who said that there were no police in the area. So further confirming that this was definitely not the police, because they didn't see that interaction at the door, they just heard it. Jake at the front door is trying to bust in the door. He can't do it, so he takes his shotgun, ejects a spent round, and then puts a slug through the doorknob, making it come wide open. He pushes it open, steps over the body of James, and begins to search the house. The house is empty, every door is open except one, and it's the bathroom door where Denise and Jamie are hiding in the bathroom. Jake begins to try to push the door open, he can't do it, and finally he just starts trying to smash the door in. And after 10, 15 blows, he actually managed to split the top half of the door open because the dresser was blocking the lower half. He goes into the bathroom and he rips down the shower curtain, and there is Denise bear hugging and protecting her daughter, Jamie, in the tub. Jake hands duct tape to the mother, Denise, and tells her to put duct tape over the mouth and the hands of her daughter. She refuses. She's protecting her daughter. Jake sets his shotgun down, pushes Denise aside, and does it himself. And then, after getting Jamie out of the tub, he picks his shotgun up again, aims it at the mother, turns his head, and he pulls the trigger and he kills the mother. Picks up Jamie. She's only about 5 foot, 100 pounds, and he drags her out to his car, opens up the trunk of his Taurus, puts her in, shuts it, and he's on his way. He was in the house for a total of 4 minutes. He would say in his confession, Jake, that as he's driving away, about 20 seconds after departing the house, he saw all the cop cars coming down the road, and actually police officers would say they remembered a Taurus yielding to the police cruisers as they came in. He makes his way around them and off he goes. And Jamie would say she remembered hearing the sirens, and then they fade as they disappear. Jake would drive 70 miles to his house where he would keep Jamie prisoner. For the next 3 months, investigators, the local population, everybody is looking for Jamie. And at the same time, I mean, people didn't have high hopes for her safe return. I mean, in the vast majority of cases like these, where a child's been abducted, unfortunately, they usually don't get home safe. And so the whole community is just devastated. This is gaining national attention. Everybody's looking for Jamie and they can't find her. The whole time, she was being held 70 miles away in Jake Patterson's cluttered, kind of crummy house that was out in the middle of the woods. When they got to his house, he burned her clothes and his gloves and the duct tape. He gave her his sister's pajamas, and then he had her go under the bed, this bed he had in the house, and he barricaded her underneath the bed. And so she had a pillow and a blanket, and she was just underneath this bed. That was it. She basically was ignored. I mean, her captor, Jake Patterson, he puts her under the bed and he warns her, if you leave or try to escape, bad things are going to happen to you. And because she did witness him kill her parents, she knows he's capable of that, and he knows that she knows that he's capable of that. So he had this stranglehold on her where he basically just said, "You're staying under the bed. And don't you dare leave." And she listened, and frankly, you can't blame her, right? And so she would go stretches of 8, 10, 12 hours of laying under the bed with no food, no water, no bathroom breaks. But ultimately, she was just kind of ignored. There wasn't really a plan for, what was going to happen when she got to the house. He just kind of neglected her. After 2 weeks where he was really on guard, and he told her that he was keeping a shotgun right outside her door in case anything went down with the police, when no one came looking for them, or when no one arrived at his place, he felt very confidently that he had gotten away with his crimes, to the point where Jamie would say, he started having guests over. He had friends over, and he just told her, "Stay in the room, don't come out." And so for 87 days, that's how it was. She just was neglected. This poor girl was underneath this bed, just wondering what the heck's going to happen. With obviously no time to grieve over the loss of her parents. Mr. Patterson, he really didn't leave the house. And when he did, I think he left one time to visit a grandparent, and he was very aggressive in warning her that he would hurt her if she tried to leave. But for the most part, he didn't leave the house. But you could tell in looking at this case that he became fairly confident that he was just going to get away with this. And so he actually applied for a job. And he left one morning to go to the interview, and it's kind of funny in a dark way. He wrote on his what did he write on his application that he's an honest, hardworking guy, and under skills, he said he doesn't have much work experience, but he shows up to work and is a quick learner. And so here he goes. He goes out to just get a job and go back to normal. And when he left that morning, Jamie, who's under the bed, she's done. She's not going to be a captive anymore. And as soon as he leaves, she pushes aside the barricade of, there's some weights that were there and dressers. She pushes it all aside. She runs out. She puts on his shoes, which are too big for her. She puts them on the wrong feet. And she runs out the door. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know anything, but she's gone. A woman was walking her dog around 4 p.m. Her name was Jeannie Nutter. and she sees this girl, this teenager, who doesn't have a coat on, she doesn't have gloves on. It's bitterly cold. They're in the middle of Wisconsin in the wintertime. And she sees her coming towards her, and she can tell kind of instinctively that something's wrong. Okay, this is not just some nice kid coming down the road. There's an issue here. And as she got closer, and the girl said, "I'm lost, I need help, my name is Jamie," the woman, Jeannie, said that she immediately knew who it was. She lived in the area, and she had seen the posters up for Jamie. She knew exactly who she was. She gave her a big hug and held her and said, "You know, I've got you. I'm going to take care of you." And so, holding her closely, she brings her to a nearby neighbor's house. She said, "This is Jamie Close. We have to call the police." And they go in there, and the homeowners got their weapons out, and they guarded the door, and they huddled around Jamie while Jeannie called the police. And the police just didn't even know what to do. They were so shocked that they had found Jamie Close that it actually took a minute for them to recognize what they were saying and how urgent it was that you come here right now, because at some point her captor, who can't be that far away, is going to recognize that she's not there anymore. And so they send the police, and luckily Jamie is brought in and is saved. Certainly not from the emotional toll, but she's physically safe. Jake comes home from his big job interview, and he sees that Jamie's gone, and he sees footsteps leaving his property in the snow, and he goes out looking for her. And just because this is the way things go sometimes, he was immediately rounded up by the police. They found his car, they found him, and as soon as he was pulled over, he didn't resist. In fact, he immediately identified himself and said that he did it. Jake Patterson was given a life sentence without the opportunity for parole, so he will die in prison. But to this day, no one really understands how this could have happened. And going back to what I said at the beginning, cases like this don't happen. There's always some reason for a crime such as this. We can't, as human beings, accept that some stranger has the ability to randomly target a child and go as far as to kill their parents in front of them and hold them hostage when they have no criminal history. There's no red flags. He happened to see her getting on a bus, and that was all he needed. I mean, how could that possibly be the case? But in this unfortunate case, it just is. So that's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Please hit like and subscribe. I'll be doing stories like this one and many more, mysteries, scary stories, spooky stuff, interesting stuff on this channel at least once a week. So I hope that you will continue to tune in. And please follow me on social media. I am MrBallen on TikTok, and I am John Ballen 416 on Instagram. If you have story suggestions, you can hit me up on Instagram, and I will definitely get back to you. So that's going to do it, guys. Thank you all very much. Talk to you soon. What's up, guys? MrBallen here. You probably know me from TikTok, where I tell scary stories and kind of interesting, true crime stories, that kind of thing. But hopefully you're starting to look at my content on YouTube. Granted, it's not nearly as robust as what I have on TikTok, but I'm genuinely making a push to make this YouTube my primary platform to tell my stories on. So please, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to try to do at least one, or I am going to do at least one video on YouTube a week, if not two. And as I get, frankly, better at creating the videos, I will try to do more as well. So please subscribe, turn on notifications. I'd really appreciate it. So today we're going to be covering the disappearance of Lars Mittank. So this particular case is not new. It's been covered a ton on YouTube, on Reddit. I mean, it's everywhere. But the reason it's so popular, or I should say it's drawing so much interest, is because there's this fascinating video that goes with the case. Basically, Lars, who disappears, we see his final moments on a closed circuit TV camera at an airport. And there's multiple camera angles. It's right in front of you. It's not hard to see what he's doing. There's multiple witnesses. There's so much information around kind of what led up to this, from doctors, from his friends, and then there's this video. Like, there's just so much information, and no one knows what happened or where he is. So let's dive in. On June 30th, 2014, Lars Mittank and 4 of his friends, these guys are all in their 20s, They left northern Germany, where they were all from. They lived, they worked there, and made their way to Bulgaria. They were staying at a very popular seaside resort called the Golden Sands, and they were just going to have a nice vacation, a nice week-long vacation. They get there, they check into their hotel, and promptly begin to relax. And everything is going great. They're, going to the clubs, they're going to the beach, they're eating good food. I mean, it's going the way they had hoped it would go until the end of the trip. So on one of the last days of their trip, July 6th, Lars is at a local bar, and they're watching a soccer game. And something happens where Lars basically voices his interest in one team, and the locals that were in the bar, they were supporting the other team. And so they start, arguing, but it escalates really quickly. It turned into a full-blown thing. His friends come in, they pull him out. There was no physical violence in the bar. It was just an altercation that could have gone to blows, but it didn't. Later that night, Lars and his friends, they're getting ready to shut it down for the night, and they go to a McDonald's. And so Lars doesn't want to go in, so he stays outside, and his 4 friends go in to get some food. When they come out, Lars is gone. And so they're sitting around waiting for him, and he's nowhere to be found. And they say, okay, well, maybe, he went back to the hotel. Perhaps he just wanted to crash early. So they go back to the hotel, and he's not there. And so they kind of are faced with this decision of like, well, what do we do? And they're like, well, he's an adult. I'm sure he's fine, and I bet he'll turn up soon. So they just kind of write it off and say, Lars will come back. And so they go to bed. When they get up, Lars had returned, and he had this kind of bizarre story about why he was missing. He said that this group of men who he thought were either Russian or locals, so Bulgarians, had attacked him, and he was convinced that they had been sent after him by the people he had been fighting with in the bar over that soccer game, that they had kind of ordered a hit on Lars. And that was his whole story. And so, his friends are looking at him and they're like, why did you leave? If you had been fighting with them, wouldn't it have occurred like right outside the McDonald's and we would have come out and found you? Like, you had to have gone somewhere for this to happen, or they had to like entice you to go somewhere to leave the McDonald's. And then like, how long did this attack take? Because this is like, midnight, let's say they're at McDonald's and you're not back at the hotel for, 4, 5, 6 hours. Like, the time didn't make any sense. But ultimately, they kind of decided that, what, Lars just had a weird night. He's back now. He is safe. So let's just write it off. He was attacked, but we're leaving here today anyways. Lars said that he got hit in the ear during the scuffle with these 4 assailants. And so just to be safe, they said, Lars, you should go to the doctor. You should just get it looked at before we fly home. So Lars goes to a doctor who examines him, and he looks in his ear, and it turns out Lars has a perforated eardrum. And, at first, the doctor actually suggested surgery, which Lars refused. He didn't want to do surgery in Bulgaria. If he was going to do surgery, he would have done it back home in Germany. And he instead goes for the antibiotic that this doctor prescribes him, which is called cefuroxime. So here's an image of it. You can see it for yourself. So he gets this antibiotic, and the doctor tells him that, flying, because he was scheduled to fly home with his friends back to Germany that night, flying could be problematic for someone with a perforated eardrum, because the change in air pressure as you're flying could potentially make the damage to your ear worse. And so the doctor suggested that you don't fly home with your friends tonight. Instead, you delay your trip home a couple of days, and you just kind of let your ear, recover a little bit before you fly home. So Lars goes back and he tells his friends what's going on with his ear and what the doctor said. And their first thought is, well, we'll stay with you. We'll stay here with you. We'll all delay our flights, and we'll fly home together in a couple of days. But Lars was adamant. Maybe he was just trying to be a good friend and not make them worry. He just said, look, I'm going to be totally fine. You guys take your scheduled flight tonight. Go home. I'm fine. I'll get a cheap hotel. I'll stay here for a couple of days, and then I'll make my way home. It's not a big deal. So Lars and his 4 friends, they take off for the airport. His friends go into the airport and fly home to Germany. And Lars goes to look for a hotel near the airport because he's only going to be delaying his trip a couple of days. And he'd rather just be close to the airport. So he finds this cheap hotel called the Hotel Color. And so this is really where Lars's behavior starts becoming totally bizarre. So around midnight, Lars calls his mother, and he tells her that she needs to turn off all of his bank cards. like, shut off my credit card, shut off my debit card, turn them all off. And she's confused, right? Like, she's trying to make sense of what he's saying, but there wasn't really a good reason for why he was saying this. And then he hangs up. And so she's kind of left with what's going on. Then at 3 a.m., so a few hours later, he calls her back. And now he's whispering. And he's clearly terrified. In fact, Sandra Matank, his mother, would later in an interview after this whole case really blew up, would say to a German TV station that through the phone, she could tell that her son was terrified. This was not an act. This was like, he is terrified. He's fearing for his life. But he calls her at 3 and he's like, there is a group of men trying to attack me. They're gonna kill me. And he was 100% convinced of it. She, Sandra, would later say that she wished that she had asked more questions of her son. But this behavior was so uncharacteristic of him that I think his mother just kind of was like, okay, we're gonna get through the night. I'll talk to my son tomorrow. He's coming home tomorrow anyways. But that didn't happen. So finally, after that phone call at 3, he texts his mother a little bit after that, asking her about the antibiotic he's been prescribed. And he's asking her what it is. He's listing the name, which again is cefuroxime 500. And he's asking her about it like he has no idea what it is. And she's like, that's a very commonly prescribed antibiotic that lots of people prescribe. They gave it to you. Investigators would later speak to staff at the hotel and they would review the hotel's footage, their CCTV footage. And between the first phone call to his mother at midnight and the phone call at 3 a.m., Lars had actually been pacing the halls at around 1 a.m. He'd been pacing up and down the halls and he was ducking into an elevator and hiding. And then at some point he had left for about an hour and then came back and no one knows where he went. At 6 a.m., Lars was dropped off at the airport via a taxi, and investigators would speak to the person who rode that taxi with Lars, and they would say that he seemed a bit off. They said that his pupils were very dilated. He gets to the airport and he texts his mother that he's arrived at the terminal. At this point, his mother confirmed that his flight had been booked, and she suggested to him that he should go talk to the airport doctor and just get his ear looked at one more time before he flies home. And I think on some level, she just wanted a health professional to see her son, just because the behavior he had shown over the past, 12 hours was just totally out of character. The CCTV cameras capture Lars walking into the airport, seeing this doctor, and then I'll get into what actually happens. So on camera, and you're gonna see it in a minute, Lars goes into the airport. So his mother's told him that he needs to go see a doctor, and he does that. He walks over to where the doctor is, and he goes inside. Everything seems totally normal. That doctor would say that he was pleasant, but as he was being examined, the doctor looked in his ear and said, "Yep, everything looks okay. You can fly home." But the doctor would say that it was clear that Lars, he was paranoid about something. The doctor didn't know what it was. He has no context. But he could tell that something was going on. He was fidgety, he was a little bit nervous. And then when a construction worker came into the to the doctor's office, he had on a construction, bright, reflective vest. They were doing some renovations inside of the airport, so this is fairly normal. And apparently this construction worker, was actually working on the doctor's office, and he stepped in to maybe ask a quick question. Lars sees this construction worker, and this is actually, I think this is off camera. You see that he's in the office, but you don't see this interaction. And something happens where, this guy triggers a full-fledged flight response, where Lars drops everything he has, leaves his luggage, and starts yelling, "I don't want to die, I don't want to die," and sprints out of the airport. This is all on camera. You're going to see it in a second. And he leaves the airport. He's just kind of looking around. He doesn't really know what he's doing, and he kind of like jogs his way across the parking lot, and he gets to a big barbed wire fence, instantly scales it. The barbed wires don't seem to affect him, and he disappears into the woods, never to be seen again. So since his disappearance, there's only been, one unvalidated sighting of him. It was a year later by a trucker who really didn't have much information about him. He just said that he picked up a guy that was like barefoot walking on the road, who later on, this truck driver would look at the news or something and would say, oh, that looks like Lars Mittank. But that's unconfirmed. Other than that, we have no idea what happened to him. A couple theories about what might have happened. The first one is that perhaps there was a side effect of this antibiotic that he was given by this doctor in Bulgaria. But there's a couple huge issues with this. The first one being Lars never filled his prescription. The doctor, when he went to the airport, was able to see his records and he had not filled it. So he didn't have the antibiotic. But even if he had, this is one of the most commonly prescribed antibiotics that, the percentage of people that have any sort of side effect is it's like less than 1%. So it's possible, but he never filled his prescription. So that seems like that's kind of out the window. The other is, especially if you look at the mydriasis that he was experiencing in the taxi cab with the highly dilated pupils, the hit to the head, he's this ruptured eardrum, that perhaps he suffered like a traumatic brain injury, like a concussion, that was leading to somewhat erratic behavior. And I'm by no means claim to be a medical professional, but typically if you see side effects of a head injury, it doesn't present itself immediately and like super aggressively. It's usually over the course of time, your behavior changes, or at least a couple days later they present. It's very rare that you would be struck on the head and be a totally different person, but it is possible. Another theory is that even though Lars did not have a history of mental health issues, and neither did anybody else in his family, that the fight he got into where he was attacked could have triggered some sort of psychotic break that was so stressful that he lost his mind. That is certainly possible too. So weeks turned into months, turned into years, and despite the unvalidated sighting, no one has any idea where Lars is. He was an outdoor enthusiast. He was definitely competent in the outdoors, not like a survivalist or something, but he definitely was not out of his element out in the wilderness. And so some thought perhaps he just wanted to start a new life, and he ran off into the woods and was living it out there. But the family, the Mittank family, they hired a private investigator. They pulled out all the stops to scour the area and look for him, but there's no signs that anybody is like living in the immediate proximity to the airport in the wilderness there, and there's no body, there's no anything. He's just gone. I hope one day they're able to find Lars, for better or worse, just closure for his family. So that's going to do it. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments about what happened to Lars and where you think he might be. What do you think might have caused this? Please let me know. Also, I'm going to be posting at least one of these types of stories, these kind of interesting true crime, scary kind of stories on YouTube going forward. So I'd love it if you subscribed and turned on notifications. Also, please follow me on TikTok. My handle is MrBallen. I tell a story almost every day on that channel. Also, I'm on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. You can DM me there. I'd love to chat with you there. And that's going to do it, guys. Thank you so much for your support. But it's the state that the remains were found in, and some of the other things that were found in conjunction with these remains that raise a lot of questions. Hey, what's going on, guys? MrBallen here. You probably know me from TikTok, where I am known for telling scary stories and talking about unsolved mysteries and true crime. But if you are not coming from TikTok, and I'm starting to see a trend that actually a lot of people are just finding me on YouTube, which is really cool. I was a Navy SEAL for a couple of years. I was actually medically retired in 2017. And I started making content about my military experience, mostly on Instagram. And then I joined TikTok in the early part of this year. And at some point, I just wanted to try something new and wanted to try a different content style. So I posted about an unsolved mystery, which is the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's about a bunch of hikers that disappeared in the mountains in Russia, and no one really knows why. And it takes off, and it's something that I just am really interested in. I think unsolved mysteries are fascinating. I find myself almost as a hobby researching this stuff. And it was cool to finally have a place where I could actually create content around unsolved mysteries and true crime and kind of scary stuff. And TikTok was the place. But what I'm trying to do is transition over to YouTube, where I can tell longer versions of these stories and get a little bit more in depth. And so I have committed to posting at least one of these types of videos on YouTube a week. And I hope that you will subscribe and you will follow along, because right now my YouTube skills are very low. Admittedly, I'm pretty good at TikTok. I'm pretty bad at YouTube, but I'm gonna get better. I would also love it if you guys have suggestions for videos that you pass them my way, either in the comments of the video, or you can shoot me a DM on Instagram. My handle is JohnBAllen416, so JohnBallen416. Shoot me a DM and I'd love to hear your feedback. So today we're gonna talk about one of the more well-known unsolved mysteries, and it is the very strange disappearance of two college students from the Netherlands who go to Panama, and they've saved up all this money to go on this trip. Like, they were working in a cafe for the 6 months leading up to this trip that they were going to finance mostly themselves. They had mapped out all these different places they're going to go in Panama. It was going to be like part vacation, part like mission trip, where they were going to be helping out with different charities in the different villages they go to, but also enjoying the travel. These girls were very close. They were highly intelligent. They were just wonderful, smart people. And they were really excited about this trip. And they go to Panama, and the first couple weeks go without incident. And at some point, things take a very significant turn for the worst. And so let's dive in. On March 15th, 2014, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Vroon, who were both Dutch college students, head to Panama for a 6-week-long part vacation, part charitable giving trip. They had mapped out these 6 weeks really diligently. They planned to do lots of traveling and exploring, and then also they were going to be working with different charities along the way as they went all over Panama. And they were really excited about it. They had even worked for the 6 months leading up to this trip at a cafe to raise additional money for this trip. So March 15th, they arrive in Panama. The first 2 weeks they're there go beautifully. They do some traveling, they're working with different charities, and everything's going to plan. And then by the second week, they arrive in a little town called Boquete, and they stay at this hostel. So that's like a group living situation. It's pretty common amongst travelers all over the world, where to save money, you'll crash at these almost like dorms, where other travelers and people will stay in the same room as you. 2 weeks in, they're in Boquete and they're living in this hostel. So on April 1st, they're in Boquete, and they want to go on this fairly significant hike, which is going to be around this massive volcano called the Baru volcano. Up near, I guess, the summit of the volcano, there was this amazing overlook where if you climbed up to it, you could get a beautiful 360-degree view of the entire area. Vroon and Kremers decide they want to go hike up to that overlook. They were experienced hikers, but realistically, I don't think they were taking this hike particularly seriously. It was a hike that was traditionally a guided hike, meaning usually you went and did this with a local who could make sure you didn't leave the path or, fall where you didn't know there was a cliff or something. They opt to do this on their own. So they head out, and they bring the hostel owner had a dog, and they decide to bring that dog along with them. It was a very friendly dog. So Kremers, Vroon, and the dog head off for this hike up this volcano. They had a digital camera with them, in addition to water, and they had their phones. They had all the different kind of basic supplies. They had a camera, and so this is important because they take a bunch of pictures as they begin this journey. So that night, the dog returns to the hostel, but the girls aren't with the dog, and so this alerts the owners of the hostel. But they search the area, like I guess the immediate area, for the girls. They can't find them, and they decide, we'll just wait until the morning and see if they turn up. The next morning, they don't turn up. Additionally, the parents of the girls, they were used to getting very regular text messages from these girls to kind of let them know that everything was okay, and the text messages stopped. And so that alerted the parents as well by the second day after they've gone missing. And so authorities are alerted. Search crews were organized on foot for the first day. So April 2nd, there are search crews all over the place looking for these girls. Can't find anything. The next day, they set up aerial search teams. They're scouring the jungle looking for signs of these girls. No sign of them. The search continues, and then on April 6th, the parents of Kremers and Froon, they arrive in Panama. They immediately offer a $30,000 reward for any information about their daughters, which is a ton of money in Panama. It's roughly equivalent to about $500,000 in a developed country. I mean, with 30,000 US dollars in Panama, I mean, you could buy land, you could buy a house, you could start a business. I mean, this is big money. And considering many people, especially in that area, were day laborers that were working for like less than $10 a day. I mean, you would think that that type of reward for just information about these girls would incite hundreds of people to just on their own go looking for these girls. And if you consider too that, I mean, this is a small town. I mean, news travels fast. You know, this is the area they probably grew up in. They know the area really well. The idea that with an amazing incentive, the financial incentive, and just the fact that they know this area really, really well, it was odd that nothing was turning up. There were no leads coming in. 3 months go by and there is not a sign of these girls anywhere. They have vanished. There's no leads. Nothing's been found. You know, obviously at this point, the family and investigators at this point have pretty much accepted that they're probably deceased at this point, but they're looking for them. They want to know what happened. And a local woman finds Froon's backpack, her blue backpack, 5 miles away from where the girls were supposedly hiking, or where they had intended to hike. Navigating a jungle is exceptionally difficult. Even with the right equipment, even knowing what you're doing, the travel is so slow. Cutting through the growth on the ground, there's animals to contend with, even though it's incredibly moist, and there's lots of moisture in a jungle, the water oftentimes can't be drank. So the risk of dehydration is really high. The jungle that they were in was incredibly mountainous. And so in addition to just navigating a jungle, you're dealing with pretty significant elevation changes. I mean, it is a treacherous place to be navigating, absolutely treacherous. And for them to have moved 5 miles through dense jungle it's incredible. That is almost unbelievable. But nonetheless, their backpack is found, 5 miles away. In addition, the woman who found the backpack, she was a local woman, and she said, I'm out in this area a fair amount, and I've not seen this backpack. I saw it today, and I picked it up and reported it. But it just means that the backpack probably had not been sitting there for very long. It had been probably placed there within the past couple of days, let's say, which doesn't really provide that much clarity, but it adds to the kind of intrigue around what actually happened. So the backpack was in great condition, and everything inside the backpack was very neatly kind of placed. It looked like someone had very intentionally placed everything in the bag, zipped it up neatly, and put it down by the riverside to be found. It didn't have the look and feel of a backpack belonging to two missing people in the Panamanian jungle that's been missing for the past 3 months. It looked like it had just been grabbed off a shelf, put some stuff in it, and put down. But either way, inside there was, their sunglasses, there was a water bottle, there was some underwear that was in there, and their digital camera was in there, which is going to be really important. And both of their phones were in there, another really important part of this investigation. So when the initial search was conducted, it was done with a focus on the volcano area, because that's the last place the girls had been, at least as far as everybody understood. But now that they found this backpack 5 miles away, they had a new area to search. And so they start searching around the area around the backpack, and they quickly find some of the girls' clothing neatly folded on the side of a river, but no sign of the girls. And then another 2 months go by, and they finally locate in the same rough area that the clothes and the backpack were found. They actually discover some of the remains of the girls, that DNA confirms it was them. but it's the state that the remains were found in and some of the other things that were found in conjunction with these remains that raise a lot of questions. So of the remains that were found, DNA proved that some of them were Chris Kremers and Lisa Ann Froon. DNA also showed that mixed in with some of the bone fragments and pieces of remains that were found were at least 3 other people's remains. So we're talking about 5 people's remains in the same area. Also, interestingly, scientists were able to look at the bones and there were no scratches on the bones. So that's important if you think about it, you know, because their bones were found all over the place. They had been, you know, broken apart, right? Well, if an animal had been responsible, there would have been scratches all over the bones because they would have broken the bones that way. Without those scratches, the only other way it could happen is if they've basically been pulverized, basically broken with like blunt force. So obviously something horrible has happened to these 2 girls, but their remains really only show investigators that the women had died. It doesn't show how they died or really anything. And so investigators needed to look at the other evidence to try to get a better sense of what actually happened. And so they look at the phone records and they can tell that on April 1st, when they started this hike initially, there is a string of distress calls that are sent within like an hour of the hike starting. So whatever happened to these girls happened almost immediately on their hike. None of those calls connect. Over the course of those first 4 days, as they're trying to reach help via their cell phone, nothing's connecting, and then Froon's phone dies. Kremer's phone does not, and they begin, they or she, begin turning it off and then turning it on sporadically to try to get reception. On April 6th, something interesting starts to happen. Somebody was trying to access Kremer's phone. There was multiple failed login attempts, and it got to the point where you weren't even allowed to input any more codes. It was just like locked, the phone locked. So somebody was unable to get into the phone. From April 7th to April 10th, there were 77 calls attempted, distress calls attempted. And then on April 11th, the phone died, and that was it. So in addition to the phone, they started looking at the camera. And so when you look at all the pictures they took, the beginning of the camera roll is this wonderful, you know, montage of these 2 girls having this great time hiking up this volcano. And then as night begins to fall, you can tell that their expressions begin to change a little bit. It looks like you could begin to see that maybe something was wrong. Perhaps they're lost. We don't really know. But then there's no more pictures taken until April 8th. 90 pictures, over 90 pictures are taken between April 8th and April 10th, which is that period of time where all those distress calls were made on Kremer's phone before Kremer's phone finally died. The pictures are very strange. There's a lot of theories about why they took the pictures they did, but in a nutshell, the pictures, none of them include pictures of the girls, with the exception of one, which is the back of Kremer's head, and it appears to be bleeding. The rest are you know, shots of the landscape, and they're all taken in total darkness. So they're in the middle of the jungle in total darkness, taking these pictures. There was one picture that looked like whatever gear they had been kind of lined up on a rock, and someone had taken a picture of it. There were pictures of candy wrappers, and there also was a picture that was like looking down into a ravine that perhaps was a picture of one of the girls down in the ravine. So it's unclear who's taking the pictures. It could be the girls, could be one of the girls, could be a third party, we don't know. And then there's a ton of speculation about one picture in particular. So picture 509, as it's been dubbed, because that was the number on the camera roll, was deleted from the camera. Now, that in and of itself is not particularly strange. It's not crazy to think that these girls might have deleted a picture, right? I mean, maybe they accidentally snapshot something and they just deleted it. But it was permanently deleted, right? So if you hit delete on a digital camera, it's deleted. But a professional with the right software could reconstruct that image if they plugged it into a computer. Now, in order to permanently remove it from your camera, the girls would have had to connect it to a laptop. to a computer and wipe it that way. They didn't have access to a computer. So at most, they might have hit delete, but it still would have had that kind of archived, almost ghost image that a professional investigator could have reconstructed. But when they went to do that with this deleted image, it was wiped for good. So someone had managed to professionally wipe one picture. It was the last picture on the camera roll. So the pervading theory here is that these girls got lost and fell to their death. But to me, that's totally unsatisfactory. I believe they were murdered. And I think it's because there's just too many things indicating that foul play was involved. How did they go 5 miles across incredibly rugged terrain that even amongst Navy SEALs, that would be a very difficult distance to cover, even with all the right equipment? How did they, without the right equipment, not knowing the area, without a guide, without even flashlights, how did they do that? And then let's just assume they managed to go the 5 miles, okay? They fall to their death. Why are their remains, 1, incomplete, and 2, scattered and mixed in with other people's remains? Why were Kremer's bones bleached? And why weren't there scratch marks on the bones? I mean, you would think that in order for if they've fallen off this cliff, let's say, in order for their remains to be scattered all over the place and be dismembered, that an animal would have to be involved if there's no foul play involved. And there's no scratch marks on the bones, so an animal couldn't have done it. So there's lots of questions that go unanswered. And then if you look at those pictures again, it seems an awful lot like somebody else was taking those pictures. Somebody was trying to access Kremer's phone towards the end there, and someone looks like they were using their camera as well. And then, the backpack that was found, it just seems like it was kind of staged. But then again, like, to what end? Why were they giving away the camera and the phone, which kind of led them to thinking probably this is foul play? Why would they have placed the backpack? That doesn't really exonerate anybody. It actually just adds more questions about the case. So the whole thing is just very confusing, but the narrative that they simply got lost and fell, to me, seems like the most far-fetched thing out of all the theories. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you like this, please like and subscribe. I'll be doing these at least once a week. I'd love it as well if you dropped in the comments suggestions for future videos. And also, please, if you want to message me, hit me up on Instagram. My handle is JohnBAllen416. Also, please follow me on TikTok. That's MrBallen on TikTok. And so that's going to do it, guys. Let me know what you think happened in the comments. Thanks.